Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome and welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. This is going to be a project for our vintage series. We're upcycling that gorgeous yellow Dresden Plate quilt into 6 other projects. And today's video is kind of a double dip for me because I was sent these awesome looking jeans from Flavson and I love them so much. They are really cute. The legs are wide. I love the wash on them. I like that little stonewash grunge look they got going on. The downside is they're not on me because they don't fit. I actually ordered a size larger than I have been getting in all of the brands these days, and they don't fit. Like, I think I'd have to remove a couple ribs to get them around my waist at this point, or whatever is around. I would have to do something drastic to get them to fit me. So instead, we're just going to upcycle them too. Yay! So we have our 4x5 panel out of the vintage quilt, and we have these awesome jeans, and together they're going to create a super cool, fun mini quilt. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to square up my quilt, and then I'm going to cut binding strips from the legs of these jeans, and I'm going to bind my quilt with the jeans, and it's going to be so cute. So let's talk about squaring up this quilt first. If you saw the video where I cut up the Dresden Plate quilt, you'll remember that I clearly stated that some of the Dresdens in this quilt need a little love. But what we're going to do with that is going to come after the binding. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of square it up, because I didn't really worry about that too much when I was cutting it out of the larger quilt. But I definitely want to make sure that it's kind of squared up now. So I'm going to start at a corner, and I'm going to use my 12.5-inch ruler. And I'm going to cut 2 sides to get them to square up. And I'm really just going to kind of find a line, a seam on the quilt, and hope that, yep, if I can line up this ruler on this seam and close to this one. So I should be able to cut here and here, and that will make my corner square. And then after that, I'll be able to continue down the sides following those marks just to make sure that my quilt is straight on the sides and trimmed and squared up. Yeah, so here we go. I'm going to just continue down this side now. And I'm going to use where I cut before to line up. Actually, let me turn this around because I'm cutting towards myself and that's not easy. All right. I'm going to use the cut line that I just created, and I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler, 6 to 7 inches along that cut line, so I can cut off more of that side. And then I'm just going to move it up again. And this is when, I'm working with an 18 by 24 inch cutting mat. So if you guys are out there and you're like, I can't do this because my cutting mat is only 18 by 24, well, that's what I have too. So you just lost that excuse. Sorry. All right. And now, again, I'm going to line up the ruler to get down to this corner. Now, I could use my ruler, because it's a 6-inch ruler. I could use my ruler and just cut this way, but instead, I'm going to grab my 12.5-inch ruler again. And I'm going to line it up on that edge and on this edge. And you can move it in if you needed to. I feel like I'm pretty good right there. It looks like that's pretty straight on that seam. Yep, this should be good. So I'll be able to cut this. And that gives me a good 12.5 inches down that side before I turn the quilt to start cutting off the side of the quilt to make it straight. And this is just because, you know, when I was cutting it, I didn't worry about that. I was just cutting the quilt apart just to get it cut apart and into project size rather than a huge quilt. And again, I'm just going to move my ruler up so I can line it up on that cut line that I had before. And okay, so the thing is with vintage quilts, you can't trust them, all right? You can't trust them. You can't trust that this Dresden and this Dresden are going to be the same distance from the edge, because 9 chances out of 10, they're not going to be. So just don't trust the quilt, trust your ruler, trust that you are, you know, making your measurements accurately and getting your ruler lined up correctly, and trust that. Don't trust the vintage quilt. And not to mention, it could have been right when it was first made, but I don't know about you guys, but even my quilts now, when I wash them, they shrink and they get out of square and they get kind of disjointed, I guess. So like I said, just don't trust the vintage quilt to be square. It probably won't be. Just because of washings and just the technology they used to create quilts back in the day. And the reason I want to square this up before I cut my binding is because I'm not really sure how much I need. And I have another project in mind for those jeans as well. So I don't want to cut more than I actually need for the binding on this quilt, because I have another project that I'm going to be doing that with them as two. And that's also going to be part of the vintage series. So just keep that in mind. If you like this project, you might like the other ones in the series. So stay tuned. I'm posting those videos in August and September of 2025. So that's what you have to look forward to. Not to mention the Let's Bake quilt that's continuing. If you haven't checked out that series and you'd like to make that quilt, make sure you check it out, because I've definitely changed a lot of things on the Let's Bake quilt. I feel like I made it easier. It was definitely easier for me. All right. That's 3 sides, and now we have 1 more side to go. Oops, I forgot to do the square at the corner, didn't I? You guys didn't stop me. What are you doing? I mean, come on, guys. All right. And look at that. That's going to match up perfectly. That's where we started. All right, so we are all the way around this quilt. The next thing we want to do is just measure the quilt top to see how much binding we need. So I'm just taking it and I'm folding it in half. And in half again, putting it on my cutting mat, and that's 13 inches, so 26.52 wide. And again, I'm just folding it in half. I'm actually folding it in quarters, I guess. Yeah, so 52. 52 by 64 is what the quilt measures. All right, so on the jeans, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure basically this swath of fabric. So if I take this and fold it in half, that tells me it is, oh, it's 16, 15 probably. So I think I can use 1 leg because I have an idea on it as well. I don't want to use this pocket area. Now I could take that pocket off. That would give me a great big piece of fabric, wouldn't it? Maybe I will take the pocket off. Let me look into that. We'll say this denim's pretty good because I'm ripping this basically. I'm just kind of cutting a few of the threads and then ripping it, and the denim is not ripping underneath, just the threads. So that's nice to see. So if you can get these that they fit you, that'll be great. All right, so these were definitely stone washed after the fabric was together. It wasn't a pre-stone washed fabric because you can see there's a huge difference in color there. Let's see, I think, you know what? I think I'm just gonna cut that one leg off and up, because I can go all the way up to here on the front. Don't want to cut through, so let's just cut up right here. This reminds me back in the day when I would alter my jeans. Was not for the same reason. All right. And then I didn't get all of this ripped off, but it'll be all right. I think we're going to go up to this point right here. And this is going to give me a big piece of fabric to work with. This isn't like super heavy denim. This isn't too bad. All right. And then we're just going to match up these edges. I probably should cut off the cuff just because I don't want that extra bulk. Okay, so because this denim is thicker, I'm not going to make true, I'm not going to do 2.5-inch strips. I'm actually going to do probably 2-inch strips, I believe, because I'm going to serge it on around the edge. And then I'm going to serge the edge of the binding. And then I'm going to serge it onto the quilt and around and stitch down. So it'll just be kind of like a single layer, but it's denim, so it's gonna hold up great. And it's gonna be just as good as like your quilting cotton would be. So I'm gonna cut these at 2 inches instead of 2.5. And I'm just gonna make sure to cut them straight. And I'm going to start in over here, and I'm just going to straighten this edge up. So in order to make sure these are straight, I have them folded in half, and I have my ruler, a line on my ruler straight across that folded edge down here. So that's how I'm going to make sure that they are super straight. And I'm going to turn this around because I'm not going to cut back to myself. And like I said, I'm going to cut these at 2 inches, and that's going to give me a really nice little overlap on my quilt. The calculator tells me I need 9, or 8 rather, but I'm going to cut 9 because I know that I do have some little unstraight edges. I don't know. I have some slanted edges, so I'm going to go ahead and cut 9 of these. And I'll save this piece for another project because I do have another project coming up that I may need that for. All right, now these, I'm going to sew them end to end to create my binding, and then I'll get my serger out. I've sewn all my denim strips end to end on the sewing machine, and that's really all there was to it. And now I'm going to run them through my serger, and because I want to have one of these edges kind of finished so it won't fray, because that's the edge I'm going to turn over onto the front of my quilt to stitch down. I don't want to have to turn it under and under because I feel like that's going to be way too much bulk for my machine to go through. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to sew it to the back of the quilt, bring it around to the front and stitch it down. So I'm going to have one of these edges serged so I don't have to, you know, worry about that fraying on the front of my quilt. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and run this through my serger, and that's really all there is to it. To put the binding on the quilt, I'm going to start by just attaching it to the back like I would do any of my binding. The only difference is that it's not double folded, right? It's just a single fold binding. But I am going to put my machine at 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to run this binding along the edge of the quilt. A couple things that I did to prepare my machine for this. I did switch to a universal needle instead of the Microtech. And I did put my clear pressing foot back on the machine instead of my 1/4 inch pressing foot. I don't know if it really matters. I do have my machine set at 1/4 inch, so I am still stitching 1/4 inch from the edge. So I'm just going to attach the binding on the back of the quilt. And once I'm around all the way, then I will flip it to the front and stitch it down. Now this is definitely going to be in more than it would be on, like, you know, if I would have cut 2.5 inch binding and folded it in half. But that's kind of the look I'm going for, so I'm going to be happy with it. Now just in case you haven't put binding on a quilt before, I am going to stop at this corner and kind of explain. You want to stitch to about 1/4 inch from the corner and then stop and do a little back stitch. And then you're going to pivot on the corner. You're going to fold your binding back kind of into a triangle so it goes right along this other edge of your quilt. And then again, start about 1/4 inch from the corner, from the edge. And then just continue to sew down the side of your quilt. All right, so now that my binding is attached to the back of the quilt, I'm just going to flip it over and sew it down on the front. And to hide my stitching on the front of this quilt, I am just going to stitch kind of in the serging stitch. So, I mean, you'll still see it, but it will blend right in. Go a little slow when you get to those seams between your denim strips because they will definitely, they have a little bulk to them. So you definitely want to slow down and take some caution there. And when you get to the corner, you should be able to just fold it over into a nice little mitered corner. And I am going to pivot and go down this mitered corner. Just did a back stitch back up and then a pivot to turn to the next side. I gotta say, these distressed jeans really have given a really fun vintage vibe to my vintage quilt top. Even though they're not old, just the wash on them is just, it's perfect to go with this vintage quilt. This is one of those times where it's like, well, when life gives you lemons. So when life gives you jeans that are too tight and you're not really sure who you would give them to, use them for something crafty instead. We're coming to another corner. So we're just going to flip up the edge that we'll be going on to next. Tuck that under and bring that around for our nice little mitered corner. Just went down and back up the corner and then pivoted to turn and go down the next side. Here we have it, our first of several vintage videos out of the one vintage quilt. So basically this one was an easy peasy thing, right? So I had this large quilt. There were several blocks that were not very good, but there was a section that had many blocks in it that was. So I just cut those out and put a new binding around it. Now I chose to do a denim binding around this. I think this is gonna be super cute for a picnic. And this is gonna be fun, yeah. So, or you know, couch quilt or kids quilt for a play quilt, whatever, right? The quilt has already been well loved. It just needed a little bit of help to downsize in order to maximize its potential. So this was a pretty quick and easy. Just to go over really quickly what we did. Again, I cut a 4x5 block section out of a much larger quilt. Then I cut 2-inch strips from a pants leg on some jeans that did not fit me. And I serged one side of them. Then we sewed the other side of the binding to the back of the quilt, flipped it to the front, and just stitched it down with some white thread. So this is the serged edge that you see here from the serger. And then if you look really closely, you can see that other stitching line that was from my sewing machine to get the binding sewn onto the front of the quilt. And the back of the quilt is really cute. It has just like this really thin little denim binding all the way around it. So this is gonna be amazing. Yay! I love it when we can upcycle and bring new life to vintage linens and quilts. I hope you enjoyed this quick tutorial. I hope that you picked up a tip or maybe it sparked a creative idea. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think. If you liked this project, make sure you give me a thumbs up on the video. If you like this type of thing, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications. Until next time, find joy in all you do, carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember it's always better when you make stuff up.